We are back. Welcome to the Modern Day Agent Team podcast, and we are going to cover some fun stuff today. So I want to start out with communication because it's such a crucial part of our lives and how we operate in our businesses. And then we're going to go and talk a little bit about economic forecast and how the middle class might actually be coming up in the next handful of years. And so some fun conversation topics here. So as far as communication goes, now it's so important, right? I mean, communication, in a lot of scenarios is everything. I mean, if somebody doesn't know what you want, then how are you going to get it, and how do you communicate what you want to that person, right? And ultimately, the way that you handle that communication will make somebody confident, or make them, the latter. For an example of sorts, when working with buyers in multiple offer situations, the communication with the listing agent on the other side of that transaction is everything, because they need to be overly confident in your offer closing. Okay, and so how do you have that communication, right? Well, it needs to be very clear, really deliberate, and ultimately get the point across that you're trying to make without any question marks around it. If you've ever gone and interviewed for a job, one of the main things they're looking for is communication. And a lot of the times, that communication is a lot more than just the words that you're saying. It can be a variety of different things. It's your tonality. It's your eyes, if you're, looking at them and having a conversation in person. There's so much more that goes into communication than people look at from the outside. And so handling communication in different areas, right? So say that you're structuring a seller finance deal with a person who might want to sell their property, and maybe they've been trying to sell it for a little bit and it's overpriced, but they've got that property primarily paid off, and you send over an offer, and that offer is seller financed, and you've got a scenario where maybe the broker in the middle of that transaction isn't actually properly explaining to that seller what the benefits of a seller finance deal are. And so ultimately, we see seller finance creative deals blown up the most because a broker can't properly explain it to the seller of that property. And so if you can get everybody to sit down at a table, go through all the options, and ultimately come up with what that seller is looking for. One of the reasons why I love real estate so much is because you can be so creative inside this space, and you've got to be able to communicate all those different options. And a lot of the times, if there's more people in between the person receiving the information and being able to understand it, that communication can get misstrewn. And so in these different scenarios, we like to sit down at a table and talk about exactly what the goals are of that seller if we're trying to purchase a property seller financed, and figure out, all the different scenarios that we could put into play that would accomplish our goals as the buyer and the seller's goals as their net at the end of the day. And so just a couple of ways that communication can either make or break a transaction, right? But it goes into so many different aspects of life at the end of the day. Benjamin, what are some key components of communication for you? Talking with agents and buyers and different folks who you might be working with. What would you say? Your communication's great. Right?
I appreciate it.
Excellent job with communication. How do you feel like you are able to grow that skill set?
It's about making sure that you're not just telling people things, but then actually making sure that those things are understood as well. Because it's one thing for me to say the words, it's another thing for that to be processed and understood and applied by the person receiving the information. So communicating in a way that's accessible, in a way that's comprehensible across different levels of experience within real estate. For instance, I'll communicate differently with a buyer who's a first-time home buyer than I would with somebody who's purchasing their fifth house, or with somebody who's an investor. So we have to communicate at the level that works best for the client as well. And then when it comes to communicating with listing agents, with the buyer's agent, just keeping the idea in the back of my head that there's other people in the transaction who need information by certain milestones in order to be able to carry out their portion of the work that needs to be done. So there's a couple different ways that we do this. One is we use a great CRM that updates the listing agent and the buyer's agent at every milestone within the loan process. So processing, disclosures, appraisal, underwriting conditions. We have auto emails that go out through our CRM, and not every lender does this. We have auto emails that go out through our CRM to the buyer's agent and the seller's agent so that people can be aware of how the deal is progressing, make sure that things aren't delayed. And then, it's more than just the auto emails as well. I'll reach out to the buyer's agent, of course, at every milestone, but then the listing agent, I'm oftentimes communicating when the appraisal's been ordered, when it's been received, when we're conditionally approved through underwriting, when we're cleared to close. It's important as the lender in the transaction. Obviously, my first interest is in the buyer as well. But we also have a seller on the other side of that deal who has expectations. They might be looking to buy as well. So they might, if something's delayed, they might have to delay their purchase. So the seller also has a right to know what's going on with the buyer so that they can adjust accordingly if changes need to be made.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And so ultimately, when we're talking about communication from a 1,000-foot view, it's in so many other spaces other than just our jobs, right? It's in every aspect of life. And no matter what business you're running or what you're doing, your communication will either make or break you, because if you can't get your point across to somebody and make sure that they understand it the right way, then you've made your point for no reason.
You haven't made your point at all.
Yeah.
You've just said words.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Right. So point for no reason, no point at all. Right. But as far as focusing on growing communication skills, I would just challenge people to keep it in the forefront of their mind when they're going throughout their day-to-day routine, and ensure that their communication is clear, ensure that their communication is deliberate, right? And ultimately focus on the other individual. Focus on where they are at and what would help them understand the point you're trying to make. When you talk about sales in general, okay, well, if you're selling somebody a house, or you're selling somebody a car, or you're selling them a sticker, right, is that going to be something that they want? It's not about what you want. It's about what they want. And so you have to put yourself in their shoes to help them accomplish their goals in order to get to the end result you're both looking for. All right. Now, that's a whole big piece of communication there as well, because you've now put yourself into that individual's needs. All right. And once you were able to put yourself into that individual's needs, you're able to have the emotional bandwidth of how, one, they're feeling, how they're going to behave because of maybe certain life things that have happened. And you're able to communicate with them in a way that they're going to receive it and be able to understand it. And so you can figure a lot out about somebody in a very short amount of time if you ask the right questions. And so much of communication is not about making a statement, but in turn, starting with questions to learn about that individual. That is my breakdown on communication for the day, because it is so important in life, in business, in every aspect that you can think of. If you can't communicate, you're not going to get much done.
Exactly. And I love what you said there about listening, because that's where communication starts with, right? We need to actively listen to the client, to where they're at, to what things they might have going on in their life, to what their goals are, to what their baseline knowledge level of real estate is. If we can't listen and take that information in and then adjust our communication accordingly, then we're not doing our jobs correctly. Mm-hmm. It all starts with listening.
Yeah. Listening, understanding, and then putting yourself in the shoes of others to make sure that you're able to communicate with them in a way that they understand. And so, super powerful tool, and don't overlook it.
Exactly.
Ultimately.
And that's why we don't have a one-size-fits-all process for every client. I kind of custom tailor every experience to that client's needs. And I know you do the same thing, whether it's, maybe one buyer's consultation is enough. Maybe they get it right at the back because they bought 5 houses. Maybe they need 6 phone calls to feel comfortable with what's happening. It's not a one-size-fits-all solution, and ultimately, we adjust accordingly to make sure that the client's comfortable.
Absolutely. Always put yourself in the shoes of the individual receiving the information.
Mm-hmm.
And so, super, super powerful tool, and one that ultimately, if you can master it, you're going to see a lot more success in life. So we were talking earlier about the economic landscape for the middle class, and Benjamin, you want to kind of just reiterate part of that conversation we were having earlier?
Yeah, we're at an interesting time in a macroeconomic environment where there's a lot of uncertainty about the future. There are things happening in government, in politics, and in the economy that are undoubtedly going to have an effect on the average American's future outlook over the next 2 years. Whether or not it's things like wages, tariffs, tax cuts, reduction in government spending, increase in government spending, differences in regulation, in the regulatory environment that's happening right now. These things are going to change the landscape of what it looks like to be an American consumer in the next 2 years. And we talk a lot about homeownership and the value that brings to people. So there's thoughts around whether or not the economy becomes restructured over the next 2 years under certain policies, certain adjustments to the real estate market, adjustments through things like tariffs. And again, this is really complex stuff, but there's a movement I see, and really a demand by the average consumer for the American dream to become attainable again. So there are going to be adjustments, I think, over the next 2 years.
The American dream, what does that look like? What does that mean?
Yeah, I mean, it looks like being able to own a home. It looks like being able to participate in the marketplace by being able to afford to invest in things like equities, stocks, retirement. It looks like being able to work an average job and attain an average lifestyle. It looks like being able to have a job that's within the trades and purchase a home on one income in a household, which hasn't been attainable for the past 20 years.
In St. Louis,
it has, but for so much of the country, it hasn't been. Mm-hmm. Right.
Yeah, right. And St. Louis definitely has been, one of those locations where we don't necessarily get hit with those economic trends nearly as hard as everybody else does because of the affordability index that we've talked about on here before.
Mm-hmm. But there's a whole portion of the country out there that's way more concerned about interest rates and about affordability of housing and about taxes and about wages than they are about the growth of the stock market. So there is this idea that potentially what happens on Wall Street is going to be less important than what they say happens on Main Street.
What happens in Wall Street?
I didn't come up with that.
Oh, yeah. I'm well aware. I'm well aware you didn't come up with that. But I've heard it 1,000 times.
Right.
But as far as what's going to happen inside of that, you can't really cast a net wide enough to say.
No, you can't.
So it'll be interesting. I think if you cut interest rates, it might actually not be that great for the overall future of real estate at the moment because property values are going to shoot up again.
Right. And then do you also start a inflationary cycle again with consumer goods where because interest rates are down now, the economy is booming again, and then we just restart inflation? That's another question.
I wouldn't mind if interest rates went down, personally, because my property value is going to shoot up.
I'd like to do some refis.
I can refinance some of my rentals.
Yep.
And that'd be awesome. Now, the average American is going to have that be one more step away from attainable. The person who doesn't have, investments and things of that nature, that might just be looking to get into the door, okay, and then make investments in the future. Well, those investments that they're going to make are going to be more difficult to come by as the values continue to go up as far as real estate is concerned. I think, 6%, I'm happy with 6% interest rates. Other people should be as well, still below the average.
Right. If we zoom out and take a broader look at where interest rates have been, 6 to 7% is actually pretty balanced.
Pretty balanced for sure. Now, when you look at the property value coupled with that interest rate, now we're starting to get a little out of
Right.
line,
When you
for
have
sure.
high prices and high interest rates, now all of a sudden there's an affordability issue.
And the median income not growing at the rate that it's needed to in order to purchase these homes as a whole of all the United States. Now, another reason to love St. Louis and Missouri Midwest in general is you can likely buy a house if you have an average income with a decent credit score. So a lot more attainable here than you're going to find on the coasts, and that's why we see so many people relocating from the coasts or just locating here in general from the coast or from more expensive areas to be able to afford a bigger, nicer house for a quarter of the cost.
Right. And when we hear things in the news about, excuse me, whether or not there's going to be a housing crash, right? We can talk about whether or not that's possible or whether or not there's so much demand and so little supply that it's almost impossible for there to be a housing crash right now. When we talk about whatever risk for a housing crash does exist, it exists much more so on the coasts than it does in the Midwest, because on the coast is where we see that dramatic disparity between median income and median home price.
Mm-hmm.
So if there's going to be a crash, it's going to be in other markets, not necessarily these Midwest markets where affordability is not such an issue. And you could even make a fair argument that there needs to be a price adjustment or a price correction in portions of the country right now.
Absolutely. And there has been for the past year.
Yeah, we've seen
2
property
years.
values in California and Florida and New York and Washington State come down.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, that's going to continue.
Mm-hmm.
I would say you have $1 million house that shoots up 45% or $2 million house, $3 million house, right? And then your median sale price. I mean, it was funny. We visited Seattle, Washington.
Last summer.
And the median sale price around there was like $800,000 or $900,000, something crazy.
And the lots are tiny,
And they're
right? Because
tiny
they're all stacked
houses.
on top of each other.
You know, it's crazy, right? And then the median income is the same you have here, and so then looks like you're renting.
Yeah.
And that's just something that people have grown to accept over there. It was kind of funny because we had some friends over there, and they had just all completely pushed buying out of the door as making it not an option.
Right.
In general.
And this guy was actually talking about, he lives in what I would consider to be the most beautiful place in the United States. Like he's got the ocean on one side and mountains on the next. And he's like, I want to move to the Midwest so that I can buy a house. Because renting's not a part of his dream for him and his family. Those portions of the country are probably overdue for a correction if we think logically about it.
Absolutely. And people will say that your primary residence is not an investment. I would beg to differ. I would say that it is an investment when you couple that with renting. Now, yes, you are going to have some repairs that you have to make over time. But now if you look at the appreciation rate and the fact that you're paying down that mortgage, well, at the end of the day, you're going to be a whole lot more net positive than you would be if you rented.
Correct. And it shouldn't be your only investment.
Absolutely
You should be investing in 401ks, retirement funds. You should be participating in equities outside of real estate. Maybe you should have a couple investment properties as well. But when you look at the average American, actually, I was reading an article recently that quoted the statistic, 60% of the average American's net worth is held in real estate. Most of that's held within their primary residence. So, you can say whether or not that's too illiquid or doesn't make for a good retirement plan. But it's kind of a fact of the matter right now that America has a huge amount of its wealth tied up in real estate.
Absolutely does. It absolutely does. And I think that's another kind of sign that it is an investment. If it's, your primary residence, it's still an investment. What other tangible, asset, right, or item, you look at it, you can touch it, you can see it, right, and the bank's going to lend you money after you own it, after you've paid it off, or once it's gone up in value, they're going to say, oh, it's worth this much now, and you can get a line of credit.
I want to give you more money just to keep owning it.
I want to give you more money, right? So the bank, right, the people who you guys give your money to hold it, right, is looking at it from a lens of that is another bank account of yours. And so you can play with it. You can use that money how you like after you have that property paid down or once it's gone up in value. And so it's an investment. It is, and it should be looked at as such.
I have a question for you about. I agree with you it's an investment. I agree with you that lots of citizens have a serious amount of their net worth tied up in real estate, particularly in their primary residences. Do you think there's any downside to the collective idea that real estate, particularly primary residences, not rental properties, but that primary residences are viewed as an investment, because that causes people then to become attached to seeing their property values go up and up and up and up every year, so that their net worth continues to grow, and that actually causes an inflation in housing prices? Am I onto something there? Do you understand what I'm getting at, or am I shooting out of left field?
I don't think that causes an inflation in housing prices. I would say what causes the inflation in housing prices is the overall housing market and economics and demand that we see. And ultimately, if you look at real estate since the beginning of time, what has been the best investment for people since the beginning of time? Real estate. Now for certain individuals who might have made strategic investments in stocks or bonds or securities or whatever it might be, maybe that wasn't for them. Right now, the average American, the average person has seen the most wealth build from real estate. And so as far as appreciation goes, we've seen it go up on average, between 4 or 5% year over year. And if you're seeing your property go up 4 to 5%, and say you're making you got a $200,000 house, you got a $1,500 payment every single month, but it went up 5% that year. Okay, well that's $10,000. All right, and if you were renting, you wouldn't have got that $10,000, and you're still paying pretty much the same amount in rent. Now, say that you've got an air conditioner that goes out 1 year, all right, and you're in a 10-year period, all right. Air conditioners, furnace, their lifespan's about 15 to 20 years, all right. So and your value went up $10,000 in 1 year, okay, 1 year, and that furnace, that air conditioner cost you $6,000 to replace it, okay, and then maybe you had to replace the roof, but you're going up 4 to 5% every single year, year over year, right? Well, you're net positive a ton, even if you had to make those repairs, okay? And so just looking at it from that lens alone shows you that's an investment. If you're paying rent, right, your landlord is receiving that money to pay their payment, and their value is going up on their property. And so they're getting the money there, Right. So ultimately, it's an investment.
Along that line, for people who are older, they're nearing retirement maybe, and they've got 60% of their net worth tied up in their primary residence, how do they access those funds when it comes time to stop working so that they can maintain a lifestyle or keep buying groceries, paying bills and insurance? Since real estate is illiquid, I mean, is their only option then to downsize, take a chunk of cash out from the equity, sell the house and start renting, do a reverse mortgage, maybe even take out a home equity line of credit? What are the options for somebody who they're going into retirement, they have a huge chunk of wealth tied up in a primary residence, and they want to liquidate that over the course of a 10 to 20 year period while they live out the rest of their retirement?
So dependent on the individual. It's so dependent on that individual and where they are at in life. Now if we talk about a 60-year-old, we talk about a 7-year-old, how much longer do they think they're going to live, and how are they going to use that money ultimately, right? Are they going to use that to pay their bills? Are they going to use it, for family, right? Are they looking to take out more money on that property as a reverse mortgage or as a HELOC or whatever it might be, refinance it, get access to that cash? Then ultimately that loan is going to be carried with that property. At the end of the day, they go to sell it, then it's on the family. They're not going to make as much money. It just really depends on that individual and their goals. Ultimately, I would say. Now, downsizing would probably be the best option. If they got a ton of money tied up into a property, and say it's a 5,000 square foot house, and there's 1 or 2 of them living there, and they want to get access to that money, well, move to a 2,000 square foot house or a 1,000 square foot house, and take that money tax-free and use it as you'd like.
Right. Then maybe you entered and maybe you take that, you downsize, you put that in a traditional retirement avenue, whether that be purchasing some equities, buying an annuity, something like that, to be able to supplement so they have cash flow during retirement.
Yeah. Hopefully at that point in their life, they're working with a good financial advisor. Mm-hmm. And they're going to be able to put that money away to fight inflation and make them a little bit on top. Good topics today. Good conversation. Hope you guys enjoyed it, and looking forward to tuning in next time.